Welcome back to another episode of Against the Grain, where trends stop and performance starts. Today, we're going to go through another 10 questions. This time, we're going to look at strength training. I know it's a very popular physical quality, so I've got 10 questions here that are some of the most asked questions on the internet, and I'm going to move through these and answer as best I can with a little bit of a longer answer, but not too crazy. Okay, first question, here we go. How often should I strength train when I'm coming back from an injury? It's a good question. It depends, is always pretty much going to be the answer with most things. But when you're coming back from an injury, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing very low intensity drills, generally speaking. So you're going to be doing things like stretching as well. But as far as strength training goes, you're going to be doing what I'd call control drills, which is a very low intensity drill. It needs to be done extremely well to get the benefit. And because these are low intensity drills, you can do them more frequently. So you might be doing them multiple times a day and doing them every day. And that's fine because you're going to recover from that. But you really have to trial this. So the first time you start doing the drills, you might pull up sore from doing it. You might need a little bit of recovery, but then you start to adapt and you can do them every day, no issue. So it really does depend. But I dare say when you're in rehab, especially the early rehab stages, you'll be doing certain drills very frequently. Like training frequency is dependent upon what you can recover from. So hopefully I've answered that one. I'm talking about low level intensity drills, not going and doing squats or something every day. So let's move on to question two. Question two. Do I have to lift heavy weights to get stronger, or can I use lighter loads and still progress? You can definitely still progress using lighter loads, and that lighter loads is subjective. Like it's going to be different from one person to the next. Powerlifter, what they feel is light might feel extremely heavy to you. So it's relative to the individual and their training history. You can still use lighter loads and progress. So you can keep yourself, for example, you might never go below 8 reps. So you might go 8 reps and above. And that gives you some room to move in terms of the rep ranges you use. You might start at 15s and drop down to 12s and drop down to 10s and go down to 8s. Then you might go back through and do it all again. And as you move through those different programs, you're going to find that, generally speaking, that the loading for each rep range will go up over time. And you might stay at, let's say, a comfortable level within a rep range. So you're not working close to your rep maximum for that rep range, if that makes sense. So you can definitely keep progressing. I do believe that you'll hit a ceiling at some point, not a full ceiling, but you'll find you'll probably stagnate and you'll probably need to, this could be years down the track, spend some time lifting some heavier stuff, or at least closer to the rep maximum for each rep range. So yes, you can progress with lighter stuff, but long term you might find it more difficult. Okay, what are we on? Question number 3. What is progressive overload and how do I apply it safely after a long break? So you've had some time off. You've heard of the term progressive overload, which is extremely important in strength training. Well, progressive overload, basically the body needs stimulus that is over and above what it was exposed to the last time you trained in order to continually get better. Now, the overreaction to this is to jump too much between sessions, so from one session to the next. And you can progressively overload. It doesn't have to be the actual loading itself, that especially in the early stages of learning or starting a new exercise or something like that. You might have 2 sets that you're meant to do for that particular exercise, for example. And the first time you're exposed to it, you might only do the 1 set because you're just getting used to it. The next time you come back to do the session again, you might do not 2 sets, but you might do 1.5 sets. And that extra half set might be enough to push the body to adapt. And that is a form of progressive overload by volume. You've just done a little bit more volume. And then once you hit the full volume, the 2 sets, and you've adapted to that, you then might look at stepping the loading up. So you do a little bit heavier. So they're examples of progressive overload. It doesn't always have to be loading. It can also be the complexity of an exercise. So you might start with a very easy version of an exercise, and the progressive overload to that is just making it a little bit more difficult via a different variation, for example. So it doesn't always have to be volume. It can be a different variation of that exercise that's a little bit more challenging skill-wise. So there's definitely variations of progressive overload. And don't get too hung up, especially when you're learning new things, on moving more weight. Think about perfecting the skill and then doing the hardest variation of that before thinking about adding loading, if it's possible, for that exercise. As far as, safety after a long break is important. Answering this one. When coming off a long break, especially if you've had a training history of training quite hard or playing a sport intensely, for example, in your mind, you're ready to go. But the tissues and the joints aren't going to be. So that's a reality you need to really ease in. And I've seen this with athletes as well, where they just want to get straight back in and go to the intensities that they were doing before the break. And in their mind, they can do it, their bodies can't. And they might strain something, or they might pull up exceptionally sore, and they don't need to do that. You can ease back into things. You really should just ease back into things when you've come off a long break. So now we're on to question number 4. This is one I've had a lot over the years. Will strength training make me bulky? And then in brackets, it's got especially relevant for women. And that's so true. I've had this discussion with women a lot of times over the years in gyms that are concerned that they're going to get too big and bulky. I think people's expectations of what strength training does to the body has been heavily influenced by elite level drug using bodybuilders, and that's how they think. Or that's what they think is going to happen if they lift weights. And as a woman, if I'm talking specifically about women, their hormonal system is very different from a male, and they don't put on as much muscle mass as easily as males do already. So they would have to do a lot of strength training to put on what's considered a lot of muscle mass and look bulky. So I'm never concerned. And muscle tissue is so healthy for the body to put on. And if you ever got to a stage where you were feeling like you were too bulky, just reduce your training. Don't train as much, and you'll detrain enough for the muscle tissue to reduce. Happy days. So it's well in your control, and it's not going to happen overnight. If you see a woman that's extremely bulky and she's not taking performance-enhancing drugs, she's likely been training for probably 10 years or more. And I'm talking heavily training, strength training, really seriously. So women can get caught up in that. But I'm never concerned about it, put it that way. It's all within your control, and your time frames, you need to understand that the time frames of putting on muscle mass as a natural is they're long time frames, generally speaking. In the early stages, you'll put on a bit, but then it gets slower. Okay, on to question 5. Should I focus on strength or hypertrophy first if I'm returning to sport? Traditionally, it's been hypertrophy first. So traditionally, people perform the higher volume, higher rep ranges for hypertrophy. Now, that's not set in stone either. For those that have trained for a long period of time and more advanced, they might gain more muscle mass from lower reps. And that's very common. So I do find it beneficial to work at the higher rep ends and move into the lower rep ends in that way, in a linear fashion. So putting on a little bit of muscle mass prior to moving into maximal strength, it definitely, I feel it does work. More muscle mass, more body weight, more ability to move higher loading. So the heavier you are, the more loading you can move, basically. So there is a benefit to hypertrophy before maximal strength for sure. And powerlifters know this well. They get to a certain stage and they just want to keep getting heavier and heavier so that they can move this extreme loading. So I do like it. I'm not ruled by that though, because if you've got a more advanced lifter, they could probably still start at 6 reps, for example, and still go easy after returning. They might have been returning off a couple of weeks off or whatever, but they're more advanced and they're more skillful, so they can handle heavier loadings early in their when they're returning. So I guess the answer is always it depends, but I do like the hypertrophy first option for managing risk, and adding a bit of muscle mass. It's generally speaking, it's a positive unless your sport requires you to be a certain body weight. Okay. Question 6, how long until I see real strength gains after coming back? Again, another question from a layoff. So they're coming back from a layoff. How long until I see real strength gains? Well, what's real strength gains? I mean, you can see them quite fast in my experience, depending on how much lifting you've done in the years prior, how experienced you are. In my experience, you can get quite a bit of strength gains, especially in that first couple of months. But if you're really advanced, you're probably at that point in your career where you can get strong, and then you find it harder to get the little gains, like little wins in terms of maximal strength, come a little slower, and that's okay. That's fine. So again, it's dependent upon your training history. But I think people are they see things on the internet. There might be a really young person lifting extreme loading, but they don't realize that person might have already been training for 6, 7, 8 years or something like that to get to that level of strength. So you need to keep it in context, and manage your expectations surrounding maximal strength, because it's something you don't want to talk about. Progressive overload, you don't want to jump your weight too rapidly, but as the weeks go on, you definitely don't want to train to failure too close to your rep maximum every week. I definitely prefer using, if it's a 3-week block, a light, medium, heavy approach, and then changing your rep range and then doing the same light, medium, heavy. That's just one example. So you're only training to absolute failure and close to your rep max once a block. That's how I like to do it. And that keeps you fresh enough, keeps the neural system, the nervous system fresh enough so that you can keep progressing. And then obviously you've got half recovery weeks, 4 recovery weeks put into your program as well to help that along. So how long? Could be quick. Could be quick early and then slow down later on. That's pretty common. But it's up to the individual or individual's training history. Okay. Where are we up to? What's the minimum dose of strength training needed for athletic performance? What I like about this question is it's a minimum dose, talking about the least amount of training for the most amount of result. And I love that. I love that minimalist approach to training. That's certainly been my influence, the coach that I've learned from. And that's in fact his saying, doing the least amount of training for the most amount of result. So the minimum dose of strength training, and this is something that's, people think we're talking about staying strong, right? You build maximal strength in the off season, the GPP and the SPP, or you build it more in the GPP and then you maintain it through the SPP a little more so. And then you get into your season, if it is a season and not one-off event. If it's a season, you're trying to maintain maximal strength levels. You don't want them to drop off from an injury prevention standpoint. What people overestimate is they think they need a lot of strength training. They think they need far too much strength training in order to be able to maintain a level of maximal strength. You could literally do one set of a line of movement for that line of movement and maintain maximal strength within that. As long as you're exposing the nervous system to that loading, you're not dropping your intensity, the loading, you're not dropping that off. And if you manage to even build on that during the season, that's fantastic. But one set can maintain maximal strength. Absolutely. Especially in season when you're trying to get athletes to recover from one game to the next, week to week, it's hard enough doing that without throwing in too much strength training. So you want them to maintain a level of maximal strength, but only enough work to maintain it. That's it. And that might be one set, and one set will do it. So I love that question. What's the minimum dose needed for athletic performance? Now, I use it in an in-season example. But overall, my approach to it is much lower volumes. I want to know that the athlete can perform the exercise using the technical model that I use for injury prevention, performance enhancement. I want to know that they can maintain that technical model progressively under higher and higher loading. And I don't need them to do high volumes of strength training. I lean much more towards low volume. I think it's far more efficient. Remember, an athlete's got other physical qualities to train. It's not just about strength training. I know that's the world is just obsessed with strength training, but there's far more important things for an athlete in terms of winning that they need to be focusing on. So strength training overall, low volume. I'll be training a little bit higher volumes through a GPP or an off season, but for the most part, it's very, very low. Okay. Number 8, is strength training safe for older athletes who've had injuries? I believe so, and I believe it's imperative that the older athletes progress and they get get back into strength training, but just do it safely. Again, there's a self-control aspect to it. The older athletes definitely need strength training. They just won't be able to deal or recover from higher volumes of it. So the recovery systems are not as good as what they used to be. The hormonal systems aren't there to support as much volume of training. So you have to be very, very smart with how much you're doing of strength training. But absolutely, older athletes need strength training. You just have to be much smarter with the amount of volume that you're doing and the intensities that you train at and all that sort of stuff. Coming back to what I was saying before, it's just like you don't need much strength training to get a result. So you just got to keep that in mind if you are an older athlete that's dealing with some injuries like this question asks. Be smart. There's certain things that you probably can't do anymore, and that's okay. You've got to find ways to balance the body and keep it healthy, and strength training is a fantastic way to do that if you do it appropriately for the individual's needs. So, number 9, how do I choose the right strength training program for my goals? It's got in brackets speed, contact, sport, rehab. Ideally, you have an astute coach that can guide you through that process and collaborate with you. So it should be a collaboration between the coach and the athlete. They should be working together to come to come up with your program design. Not the coach just saying we're going to do this and this and this and this, because it's important that the athlete buys into the process. The athlete buys into the thinking of why we're doing that exercise. What outcome do we want from that exercise? And in absence of doing that, there's probably not going to be much buy-in, and the athlete might stray from the program or just purposely not do things. So strength training program for your goals, you need to talk to your coach. You should have a coach. You should have some guidance from someone that's competent in the area and strength training. You don't want to fuck that up, because I see a lot of strength training make people unhealthy and make them far worse off. And when you're talking about athletes, if you are playing sport, you can break really fast. And if you do a really poor strength program, it fucks you up real bad, real quick. That's the leverage in strength training. It can change you fast, but leverage goes both ways. It can fuck you up really quick. So get some guidance. If you don't have a coach, get some guidance from someone that you trust can do the job, and sit down with them and talk about your goals and look at the possibilities, the opportunities in strength training. But always have a plan. Always have a plan. Okay, now we're on to the last question, question 10. What's the difference between strength training and endurance/conditioning training for an athlete? Well, they're two different physical qualities, strength and endurance. I work within four: flexibility, strength, speed, endurance. They're the four dominant physical qualities. They're all different. They're all there for different reasons. Strength training, in its purest sense, outside of putting on muscle mass, you're looking to enhance the neural system, the ability of the nervous system to overcome external loading. So the stronger you get, the more efficient the muscles, the nerves will be at lighter loadings. So there's an injury prevention opportunity, massive injury prevention, but there's also a performance enhancement as well. So you can enhance efficiency and you can protect the joints if it's done well. That's a big if. So that's strength training. You're enhancing the neural system. Endurance is more about the energy systems. So whether it be use of oxygen and energy systems in the muscles and etc. Without going too deep into that, it's underestimated the muscles and nerves, I believe, in endurance training. The peripheral energy systems, pretty much overlooked. Everyone wants to talk about the heart and lung. But that's what you're trying to enhance with endurance training. And endurance is the most specific physical quality. Therefore, you need to play the sport or variations of the sport to enhance your endurance in the sport, for it to transfer, for your training to enhance your sport. You must play the sport or variations of. It's weird. People don't get it. They like cross-training and doing all this fucking bullshit, but it actually detracts and takes them away from what the sport demands are. So they're two different things. Strength is enhancing the nervous system in the way to overcome higher levels of external loading, recruiting more muscle, etc. Endurance is enhancing the energy systems, your ability to endure the sport. And the other synonym that people use is conditioning, but I prefer the term endurance. So there you go. We've covered 10 questions on strength for episode 2 of Against the Grain. So hopefully that's provided some sort of value for you, some sort of takeaway, or even maybe sparked another question that you might want to put in the comments that I can cover on the next episode. So that's it for episode 2 of Against the Grain. I'll see you next time.